Eilean Moor is an uninhabited island off the northwest coast of Scotland. On its highest point stands the 75-foot-tall Flannan Isles lighthouse, built in the 1890s and first operated on December 7th, 1899. 1 year later, 3 lighthouse keepers working on rotation there completely vanished without a trace. Lush grass grows on the island, and in days gone by, shepherds would often take sheep there to graze in the warmer months, but the shepherds never felt comfortable enough to stay overnight. Locals from the surrounding Hebrides were quite superstitious of the island of Eilean Moor. For hundreds of years, it was believed that supernatural forces were at work there. Others believed, and some still do, that the island is haunted by sea spirits. The official report on the 3 missing lighthouse keepers concluded that they must have been swept out to sea by a violent storm, but too many questions loom over that verdict to satisfy even a slightly inquisitive mind. On the night of December 15th, 1900, a ship passing by the Flannan Isles realised the newly built lighthouse was not operational. Upon landing at Leith, they reported the lighthouse to port authorities, but it seems the Northern Lighthouse Board never got the message. A ship was due to set sail on the 20th of December to drop off supplies for the lighthouse keepers, but due to rough seas, the trip had to be delayed until 6 days later. Captain James Harvey and his crew were tasked with delivering the supplies that day. Also on board was a relief keeper, Joseph Moore, who was said to be quite anxious at the time, pacing around and refusing breakfast. The fact that there were 3 lighthouse keepers on the island and the beacon had not shone for over 10 days was disturbing him. The duty of a keeper was a solemn one, and for a torch to go unlit was virtually unheard of, especially for so long. When the ship arrived at Eilean Moor, a flag was raised to signal their arrival. After a while of waiting, nothing happened. They tried sounding the horn several times, then letting off a flare, but all they were greeted with was silence. The relief keeper, Joseph Moore, was sent ashore to find out what had happened to the light and to the 3 keepers, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. As he walked up the hill to the lighthouse, Joseph apparently felt a sense of dread wash over him. He approached the building, cautiously pushed open the unlocked door, and slowly entered. Silence hung in the air. Making his way through the lighthouse, he found cold ashes in the fireplace and a half-eaten meal at the table. He also noted the clock had stopped and an overturned chair laid on its back, which indicated to him that someone might have got up in a hurry. He moved on through the lighthouse, the whole time feeling as if he were being watched. He approached the bedrooms with dread, wondering what waited inside, but all he found was empty unmade beds. The lantern room above was all in order. Lenses were clean, lamp was trimmed, all ready to go. Another strange thing that Joseph noticed was that 2 of the keepers' waterproof oilskin coats were missing from the lighthouse, but one remained. This part of the world is very wet, windy, and cold much of the time, let alone in the dead of winter. Even on dry days, the ocean spray and wind can rapidly amplify heat loss. Why would one of the keepers leave the lighthouse without this essential piece of clothing? Joseph went back to the ship to report his findings, whereby Captain Harvey ordered a full search of the island. All they managed to find was damage from recent rough weather, causing them to speculate perhaps a freak storm had suddenly come crashing in and swept them all away. The damage, after all, was quite severe. But no such storms were noticed from the nearby inhabited island of Lewis and Harris in the previous days. Furthermore, the 3 men were experienced keepers with unblemished track records. They had dealt with storms and rough weather for years. Not to mention, it was strict protocol for one keeper to remain in the lighthouse at all times. How could they all have gone missing at once? If a freak storm were the answer for the 3 lighthouse keepers' disappearance, the bodies of the 3 unfortunate souls would soon wash up on the shores of Lewis and Harris, and if not, one of the other surrounding Hebridean islands. Speculation soon flared up. The supernatural forces that local folk spoke of were blamed by some. Others say a sea monster was responsible for the devastation and vanishing lighthouse keepers. Others claimed madness and murder. Interestingly, to the scientific mind, madness and murder isn't entirely out of the question. The old lighthouse lamps they used to use actually floated in a bath of mercury to minimize friction in the spinning mechanism. They didn't know it back then, but mercury is highly toxic. The top 3 side effects of mercury poisoning are anxiety, depression, and irritability. Depression and irritability are self-explanatory, but anxiety is an interesting one. For some people, it causes them to retreat into themselves. For others, it causes them to become very aggressive. 3 men stuck on a desolate island, with little to do and nowhere to go, could have been an incident waiting to happen if mercury poisoning had occurred. It's worth noting that if tensions between the men had reached boiling point, wouldn't there be more signs of a struggle if violence had occurred in the lighthouse? Also, is it possible that 2 of the men could have been calling for urgent help from the 3rd man who remained inside? Hearing their panic, he got up abruptly, tipping his chair on its back, leaving his meal on the table, and leaving his coat behind since there wasn't a moment to spare. The official report at the time ruled that the keepers had all been tragically killed in a freak storm. But truth be told, the bodies were never found, and the circumstances surrounding their disappearance remained shrouded in mystery. All we're left with are questions and theories. What do you think happened on the island of Eilean Mor?